Welcome to another episode of the Carpe Fide podcast, where if the shoe fits, you wear it.
And if the truth hurts, you bear it.
I am Justin Gruber.
And I am Jesse Gruber.
And today we hope you will seize the faith. Welcome to episode 192 of the Carpe Fide podcast, everybody. Jesse, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. I'm ready to rock and roll.
Ready to rock and roll?
I'm ready to kick pigs.
Well, no one knows AskANinja.com anymore, do they?
Oh, I know it.
That's from AskANinja.com. Let's kick this pig. Anyway. As we're talking, we have a special guest tonight, and he has regrets already. He has a book coming out, and we're interviewing about that book. His book is his thoughts on Iran, the Middle East conflict, and the Jews. And he's going to be talking to us tonight about that. Our guest, I'm kidding, that's not what the book is about. Ben Zeisloft, how are you, dude?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Ben, could you let our listeners that don't know who you are, could you let them know who you are, Ben?
Sure. Beyond a Middle East policy expert. No, just kidding. I am the communications director for the Foundation to Abolish Abortion. As well as, so we basically submit most of the abolitionist legislation across the country. We work with folks at the grassroots level to write and draft legislation, and it's particular to their states. We supply them with information, analyses, research to help them make the case for abolition. That's sort of our tagline, informally, is making the case for abolition. So that's what I also do. Have been doing for the past few years just as a journalist, so writing for the Daily Wire, the Republic Sentinel, a couple other news outlets. Focusing on the issues pertaining to child sacrifice in our land and how the pro-life movement, the pro-life establishment, and even the institutional church has really failed to address it. So that's sort of what I do.
Would any of our listeners have seen any of your work on X at all?
Yeah, so I'm on X as well, mostly talking these days about the abortion issue. Yeah.
Yes, you are. You are a sharp edge against the abortion issue, if I would...
Yeah,
venture so bold a statement.
Exactly what I'm going for. Yeah.
Excellent. And I would say marketing for the book, if I was doing it, you were kind enough to grant us an advance copy. And if you are really into like full on establishmentarian government conspiracies, this is the book for you, because if you didn't know that it is a government conspiracy to keep abortion afloat, you will after this book. That is a fact. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's about right. It unfortunately, conservative Republican politics, that's the case across the board with a lot of issues. If you talk to gun guys, folks who are trying to advance the Second Amendment, they have the same sort of complaints where it's like the NRA that comes in and kills their legislation, and that's the pro-life issue, the anti-abortion issue is no exception, where the old guard establishment groups are often the enemies of getting anything done, and they're in cahoots with the establishment. Even in states like Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, Kentucky, these deep red states across the country that should be able to abolish abortion, they're deep red. They have 2/3 majorities in both state houses. They haven't been able to do it, and it's because the establishment doesn't really want to. They want to sort of play it safe for the majority leaders and the committee chairs and the governor in some cases. And so the will of the people in actually ending abortion isn't really matched up very well.
And that's awful. It's really gross. You did a fantastic job in the book detailing it at length. Yeah. And I am sad. It's just sad.
After every
it's really
chapter,
sad.
You're just going to want to take a shower. And you're like,
yeah.
Why did I vote for this? I voted for this.
Yeah, everything
right.
You thought you were supporting. When you were supporting something like pro-life, you realize you were actually just funding campaigns. That's pretty much all you were doing, which is very sad, but a very true reality that everyone needs to read and understand very deeply. I didn't know exactly where you wanted to start with questions, Jesse. I know you've been like chomping at the bit to grill Ben on his vast knowledge in the abolition movement. But we also had some awesome questions come in from listeners, so I didn't know where you wanted to start there, bro.
I think this one's from Jeremy. I think it's a good intro question.
It's a perfect intro question.
We We are synced, man. So Jeremy's question is, overall, how is the abortion landscape changing across, or the abolition landscape changing across the country as a whole? Are things advancing generally, or more pushback/setbacks? He's just saying that it's hard to know now what's kind of going on now that everything's pushed back to the states with Roe. So, do you have any kind of updates from that front? I know your book touches on a lot of that, but any insight you could have on that would be fantastic.
Yes, the answer to that question is yes. There are setbacks, but there's also advancements. So, I just actually wrote a press release for us at Foundation to Abolish Abortion last week. Basically laying out all the stats from the first 6 months of this year, because most legislative sessions are wrapping up. There's still a few more states where we just filed a bill in Ohio. There's going to be more bills, hopefully in the next several months and maybe even the next few weeks. But most sessions have mostly wrapped up for the year. But we actually had 122 bill sponsors across the country. We had, I believe, 16 bills across 14 states. We had a record number of committee hearings, committee votes. So there's definitely progress. I remember, a couple of years ago when I was at the Daily Wire and I was reporting on the abolition issue, when I would write about a bill going into a certain state, it'd be like one, maybe two really solid state reps who were the champions for that bill. But now I'm seeing there's still those folks and there's more of them, but then there's also the general more conservative Republicans, better Republicans in the state houses are starting to get on board as well. And I think the grassroots, too, are really embracing the position. So a good example is in Oklahoma a few weeks ago. So Dusty Devers' bill was killed earlier this year to abolish abortion. And there were four state senators who were Republicans who were responsible for it. And they were censured by the Oklahoma Republican Party. So that was basically all the grassroots, very involved activists saying, we expect you to actually pass this bill, which would have been unheard of 5 years ago. But it's the entire state party that's fully embracing that position. So the argument's being made and it's advancing, and people are seeing the need for it with the rise of self-managed, self-induced abortion, especially in these red states. So it's encouraging, and of course these pro-life groups are still stepping in and killing these bills, which is really unfortunate. But I think people are starting to see that their arguments aren't holding water.
Can you give? I'm not sure what your general proximity to the Ohio bill was, but I know that was like a really recent push. Like just within the past week or two. Do you have any like updates on that, or like where does that stand, or if it still stands?
Yeah, so we Foundation to Abolish Abortion helped us submit that bill last week as of our recording of this, and I believe it has 2 primary sponsors and then 6 or 7 co-sponsors. So pretty decent number for the first time a bill has been submitted in a state. So from here it'll go to a preliminary hearing. I believe it's in October or later this fall, and then from there, they'll decide if they want to give it another hearing and actually vote on it. But it'll at least be guaranteed a hearing, which is pretty exciting. So the argument will get to be made publicly for the bill.
That's great. Now, Ohio is kind of an interesting state, though, because they have that constitutional amendment that people voted for. Like when legislation like this is kind of working its way either through committees or working its way toward a public hearing, like does that state constitutional amendment have any effect or bearing on this legislation that's trying to get passed?
It does. So it plainly conflicts with this legislation. So, of course, abortion being a so-called right enshrined into the Ohio State Constitution, that conflicts with the bill that's trying to abolish all abortion. So what we're doing with that bill is we're saying that amendment is null and void, even though the majority of the people voted for it. Doesn't mean that, a majority of sinners gathered into the room doesn't make a good decision. Just because it's a lot of sinful fallen people doesn't mean that that's a good thing to follow. So we're appealing to the U.S. Constitution with the 14th Amendment, which says that the states have to provide equal protection of the laws to all people. And that would, of course, include preborn people because they're persons just like us. They're just smaller. They're less developed, all the rest. So we're intentionally setting up that tension and causing the debate, and maybe even a lawsuit if the bill passes, saying that these two standards, the state constitution and the U.S. Constitution, are actually in conflict with one another.
Cool. Yeah, like one of the things as I was starting to get into the topic of abolition is I was facing this huge wave of discouragement, just on a personal level, like, oh my gosh, this is never going to happen. In any sort of practical sense, which, based on my feelings would make me lean more towards incrementalism, but based on my growing understanding on the theological aspects of abolition, I'm kind of grounded in one way, but like throughout the book, seeing how many sponsors and co-sponsors and how much talk these bills are generating, even if they're getting killed, I think is still something to be encouraged by. Like, what kind of encouragement do you have to people that are maybe like kind of flip-flopping on the issue? They're like, this is too big. Like I was mentioning earlier off record, our state of New Jersey, we're paying for other states' abortions. Or other state citizens' abortions. We're like
if aliens came down, we would pay for their abortions.
We would pay
that's
for
how
alien
bad
abortions.
New Jersey is.
Yes, that's how bad New Jersey is. So, like, sitting here in South Jersey, where our politics are totally different than North Jersey's politics, this feels like too much. So, like, what would you say to someone who, like, this feels too much? Like, how would you encourage that person?
Sure. Well, I'll say for sure that the past 50 years of the pro-life movement has proven to be a failure. Regulating abortion doesn't actually work. We've seen it empirically. All these states have tried it. They've tried to do heartbeat bills and proper burial bills and all sorts of how wide the hallways in an abortion clinic are allowed to be. Any conceivable regulation, they've tried it and they've put it into law in these red states, and it hasn't really done anything. We're at record levels of abortion for the past decade. After 3 years after Dobbs, tomorrow as we're recording this is the 3-year anniversary of the Dobbs decision, and we have more abortions in red states than when Roe was in effect. So we're clearly what we're doing isn't working. And the definition of insanity, of course, is to just do the same thing over and over again. And I think the reason it's not working is because God isn't blessing it. We're not seeing success because we're not walking in God's ways. He's not prospering our work as the church. But I think why you see the abolition movement accelerating so quickly and drawing all this attention and changing minds and hearts is because God is blessing it, because it's looking at God's law and saying how we apply these principles to the issue of abortion. Whether it's the mandate to not codify iniquity into law, which a lot of pro-life bills do, whether it's impartiality, not judging according to faces, right, not discriminating because of somebody's size or level of development of all the rest. All these things that Christians are starting to rediscover and apply, that's having this effect of drawing the culture toward our position, especially the conservatives and the Republicans. We can talk about the general apathy in the church, but I think that's starting to change, at least in some circles, and God's blessing those labors.
Now, Ben, I saw an episode of, I don't know if it was Man Rampant or whatever it was, but Doug Wilson had one of Idaho's, he wasn't a representative, but he was a lobbyist. And they said that they effectively brought abortions in Idaho down to like 4 or something like that.
Right.
So, like, how can you say, this is me being facetious, how can you say that, abortions are skyrocketing in these red states when, they're putting all these, like roundabout laws in place and they're saying it's working?
Right. Well, the specific issue of I believe that was Idaho Family Policy Center. I think that's what the group is called. So they were looking at the state reports. So the number of abortions reported to the Idaho state government. And it's sort of like saying, nobody is watching movies anymore because all the blockbusters are closed. It's like, no, it's just the way in which people watch movies has now shifted to Netflix and, other streaming platforms. It's a different economy now. In the same way, it's abortion is now mail order. It's telehealth. There's all sorts of novel ways even people in red states can get abortions. So merely repeating, whether it's I've seen the main pro-life group in Texas Alliance for Life does this too. They just take whatever the state government report says and just says that it's the full truth, and it's not at all the case. In these red states, there's still abortion pills flowing into the states. And some of these abortion providers have actually come out and self-reported their data, almost bragging about it, saying, we supplied, 1,200 abortion pills to, the state of Idaho in the past year. So you can actually tell just based on what they've said publicly, if what they're saying is correct, those alone are exceeding the number of surgical abortions that were happening under Roe. So we know for a fact that abortion is still continuing in these states. And these laws are having massive loopholes, allowing women to go ahead and murder their own children, self-manage their abortions, and nobody's really talking about it, including some of the groups like the one you mentioned.
Sorry, Justin, I was going to pass you the opportunity to ask a question, but I wanted to ask another one real quick. I love that we have Ben right here to answer all of my fun questions. So like on X, like a guy like Joshua Hames, right? He's like the red pill reformation or something like that. Whatever his podcast is. I know he's talked to Russell Hunter. He's, given a platform to abolitionists in an attempt to convince himself of abolition, as opposed to incrementalism. Now, one of his kind of personal views is that a surgical abortion is worse than a chemical abortion via pill. And so he would say, okay, well, if we can increment that down, increment the worse, quote unquote, worse sin, if we can outlaw that and then keep going, isn't that better than allowing all of it? Like, how would you reply to someone like, I don't know if you're familiar with his thoughts on that. How would you reply to his type of like viewpoint? Because it kind of makes sense in a way, but like how would an abolitionist respond to that type of thinking?
Right. Well, yeah. So I know Joshua. He's a great brother in Christ. I think he's more Smash Mouth. I haven't heard him say that particular argument, but I've heard that argument before for sure. And I think it doesn't hold biblical or logical muster. I mean, it's like saying that, killing a 10-year-old is worse than killing a 3-year-old because the 10-year-old is much bigger. It doesn't really make any sense. So of course it's more emotionally jarring and that sort of thing when you think of, instead of just an abortion pill flushing the baby out of the womb, instead you're going in with forceps or with a vacuum device and murdering the baby that way. Of course it's more graphic. It pulls the emotional heartstrings more. But in God's economy, that's not really what matters. It matters it's His image, no matter how big or small it is. If you look at the incarnation, when Jesus entered the womb of His mother, He entered as a single-celled person. His DNA was the same at that point as it was on the cross, and as it is right now in glory, because he still has His resurrected body. So the same Christ that rules and reigns over all things and died for our salvation is the same Christ who entered the womb of His mother as the tiniest possible level of development, because He's fully human. So of course that's how He started His life. So if we just apply these basic biblical principles, yeah, sure, maybe it's more emotionally jarring to think of a certain type of abortion as more violence than another, but it's still all wrong. We don't get to decide. We don't get the luxury of deciding who lives and dies based on the method required to murder them or how big they are. God doesn't give us that luxury. He's very clear in His law. Do not regard faces. You're not to show partiality. God shows no partiality. That comes up Old and New Testament. So if we're going to be imitators of God as beloved children, then we should do that too.
Thank you.
Can I join the podcast now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Maybe.
See, Ben, you thought we were having you on to talk about your book. Really, we were just having you on so Jesse could ask you questions.
I got on a mental train, and we were chugging along there. Please lay the track, steer it in a different direction.
So, I'm sorry, Ben, could you tell us the title of your book that's coming out?
The title is Forsakers of the Fatherless.
Yes,
So
go ahead.
Yeah, it's inspired by Psalm 68:5. So, Father to the fatherless and protector of widows is God in His holy habitation. So it talks about God's heart for fatherless children, and every child murdered by abortion is more likely than not a fatherless child. Either his or her dad is paying for the abortion to happen, drove the mom there, conceived that child in a one-night stand, is nowhere to be found. So it's up to us, to intercede, stand in the gap for these fatherless children. And so many Christians outsource it to pro-life groups, and they assume that these groups actually want to do that. They actually want to be fathers to the fatherless on their behalf, stewarding those resources. But they're doing the opposite. They're forsaking them. They're opposing efforts to actually end abortion and protect them under the law. And that's why I named the book what it is.
And it's a very appropriate title. One of the and you kind of just addressed it a little bit, but maybe in a more blunt way, one of the arguments of people from the pro-life side of the abortion discussion is that the way we who believe abortion needs to be abolished in sum total, you people, phrase it is that a abortion law essentially is legalizing abortion. They would say that it actually makes aspects of abortion illegal. Can you, in like a plain way for our listeners, help them understand the difference and why why when they're viewing it as, well, look, we made abortions past 15 weeks illegal, is not the biblical stance.
Right. So I think one of the most helpful ways of distinguishing between abolitionism and the pro-life movement is do we want to regulate abortion and do we want to abolish abortion? So some talk about it in terms of immediatism and incrementalism, and that can be easily strawman on both sides. So I like to use the term regulationism because that's really what it is. It's saying we need to regulate abortion on the way to abolishing it. But really what regulations do is they don't end a practice. They actually just tell you how to do a practice in a certain way. So a good example that comes up in my book is Mike Johnson's dismemberment ban in 2016 when he was in the state house in Louisiana, his home state. In this bill, if you actually read it, as I did, it says you cannot dismember a baby in the womb. You can't go in and cut off its head and pull apart its members. And then the very next paragraph says, this is not to say you cannot induce an abortion by, and then it lists the number of ways you can still legally have abortion in Louisiana, excuse me. And it's like you can still vacuum out of the womb, and it lists the ways. So it's like, what exactly did it do? It marginally, like we're talking about with pulling at the emotional heartstrings, it maybe regulated the most graphic way of murdering a baby in the womb, but it's still, very graphic ways to murder a baby in the womb are still legal, and yet it's marketed to the pro-life base as this great victory. But really, that's not the case. No baby was saved by that bill, and so many bills are just like it, where even like you mentioned, a 15-week ban. Really, all that does is it just tells women to have abortions before 15 weeks, which is the vast majority of abortions anyway. I think it's 94% of abortions happen before 15 weeks. So if you think about that law goes into effect, let's just say that it does, then women say, okay, I need to be mindful of this. I'll just hurry up a little bit. And then those last 2%, a lot of them will just go ahead and do it a little bit earlier, get their act together a little bit earlier. So Lindsey Graham is the one who proposed it at the federal level. So that should give you a hint as to how solid that is, seeing that he's not at all a conservative. So a lot of these bills, it's a lot of doing what we think is right in our own eyes. It's not going back to God's standard. It's not doing righteousness for righteousness' sake, for his glory. It's just, us trying to read the political room and doing what we think is right based on that. And that's had a lot of really bad consequences over the past several decades.
Perfect. Yeah, that was pretty succinct. I like to say it's kind of like if you're trying to help your friend who's a drunk and drinks 3 cases of beer a day, and then they come to you and they say, hey, I only drank 2 cases of beer today. You can look at them and say, well, I'm glad you're less of a drunk, but you're still a drunk.
Right.
And that's unrighteous.
Yes.
That's pretty much what we're saying. Like, yeah, I'm really glad you killed less babies, and yet you're still legally killing babies. That's unrighteous.
Right.
Is the point of the abolitionist argument.
It's wild that Mike Johnson's bill still lists all the ways. I feel like it would be one thing to just not even mention that at all, and just let it say what it says.
He clarifies you can still kill a baby that way. Yeah. He's like, just so you know, you can still. Yeah, it's really evil when you think about it.
So this is a question. After reading these perfectly with receipts laid out cases of the pro-life movement purposefully seeking to crush abolitionist bills to stop abortion. It feels like, and you being on the front line, you can probably speak to this better, but it feels like what we have are politicians who've passed legislation that don't want their legislation to become null and void because they want their name and their quote unquote legacy to remain intact and to stay connected in the pro-life realm. Is that something that you feel like is prevalent? Because it just feels like a bunch of arrogant idiots that are trying to say, well, I did this, and if you pass that, then the thing that I passed doesn't matter anymore. Is that something that you feel is a part of this?
For sure. I think the two main ways, the two main reasons that pro-life lobbyists, these long-term lobbyists who have been at it for decades, the reasons they do what they do, I think it boils down to pride and power. So you're mentioning pride, where I've done it. I've spent my entire adult life trying to end abortion in this specific way of doing the regulations, and that hasn't worked. And that's why a lot of the abolitionists tend to be a little bit younger, because they're fresh at it. They have no reason to question their entire legacy because they're brand new. Maybe they've been at it for a few years and they kind of see, okay, pro-life doesn't work, abolition is the way to go, and it's not as much of a heavy lift in terms of repentance and rebuilding what wasn't working before. But if you've been a lobbyist for your state pro-life group for 50 years, it really takes a lot of humility to say, yeah, I've been doing it wrong my entire life and it hasn't worked, and we still have legal abortion. Even though I could have been calling for the past 50 years to abolish it, and I didn't. I chose to try to regulate it. So I think that's a big impediment toward some of these old guard groups actually coming around is just maybe they started out with really good intentions. We can't really read the heart. I don't think all of them are, they actually love abortion and they're just getting paid by the establishment to go and keep it legal. I don't really think that's what it is. I think they start off with good intentions and they sort of got wrapped up into this political mindset, and now they're not really being consistent with what they claim they believe.
And one of the things your book does well is to point out those that were willing to say, "Hey, this isn't the way to go. I've been a part of this, and we need to try something different." But it is incredibly gross to have politicians who are quote unquote, pro-life, just destroying legislation that would cease abortions in their states, because their name's attached to their state's most strict abortion law ever. It just feels intensely gross and disgusting.
Yeah, certainly.
Jesse, I'm sorry. I have asked several questions. Did you have something you wanted to say?
I was gonna let Ben clarify for the listeners. I mean, we've talked about abolitionism and abortion a lot on our podcast, but for those who may be newer to the conversation, can you just real quick describe what the difference between an abolitionist bill is and what a pro-life bill is? Just in a general and quick way, just so that everyone can kind of be crystal clear about the things that we're talking about.
Absolutely. So I think we've alluded to it a little bit as we've gone, but an abolition bill tries to simply apply the existing murder, assault, wrongful death laws to babies in the womb that already apply to people outside the womb. So we call it equal protection, because you're taking the same laws to protect born people already, and you're applying it to preborn people as well. So you don't actually really have to write new code. A lot of states have just provisions in their homicide codes saying none of this applies in the case of abortion. So if you just get rid of some of those lines, then now you have equal protection. Sometimes it's literally just that simple. The bill we filed last week in Ohio is 2 pages long. And if you compare that to a lot of heartbeat bills and a lot of regulations, it's like reams of paper, dozens and dozens, sometimes hundreds of pages, changing all these different laws. And really, our position is so simple. It's just saying treat them like human beings. That's all it is. Treat them as exactly the same as everybody else under the law, because that's what they are in God's eyes. So that's the biggest difference between that's an abolition bill, I should say. A pro-life bill could take a number of different forms, and like I said, it's just regulating abortion. So it's saying you can kill your baby if ... and then some kind of criteria you have to fit first. So you can kill your baby if you look at a picture of your baby first on the ultrasound. You can kill your baby if you give it a proper burial after you've murdered it. And if you actually apply that standard to anybody who's already born, it's completely absurd. It falls apart logically. So we would never say to a serial killer, you can kill people as many as you want. You just have to actually bury them instead of putting them into your closet or whatever sick thing you do with them, right? It doesn't make any sense. It's because, again, like I said, we're flying by the seat of our pants. We're just doing what's right in our own eyes. What we think will work, what we think will get through the state legislature, instead of doing what God says and then letting him do what he will with it.
Thank you for that summation. I just wanted to make sure everybody kind of understood. I knew what we were talking about. I just want to make sure everybody else knew what we were talking about.
For sure.
I feel like one of the biggest hurdles for general public, or maybe just average Christians, is like the language in abolitionist bills regarding like prosecution. Like you hear the big pro-life push against abolition bills are, well, you're going to prosecute the mother. But I think that who was it, Russell and was it Sam, when they talked to Joel Berry. I think they did a good job of explaining kind of like we're not out to get mothers. So like what type of, what's the abolitionist perspective on that? Like why is there so much talk about prosecuting mothers, and is that really kind of like the main thing we should be talking about when it comes to these types of bills?
So you're right. Yeah, a lot of pro-life groups will say that you're trying to criminalize women. This is the criminalize women bill. And really, the bills do not criminalize women. They criminalize the act of abortion. So no matter who does an abortion, they get penalized for it, just like any other murder, because that's what abortion is. It's murder. So just like a woman, if she murders her 1-year-olds, as we sometimes see in really tragic national headlines, if she murders her 1-year-old, she faces the full penalty of the law because she's willfully taking a human life, and even more tragically, her own baby, who God made her to nurture and provide for that child, and yet she's still killing it. In the same way, if a mother willfully murders her 1-month-old in the womb, then she should face those same exact penalties. And same with the father, same with the abortionist. So there's nobody's out to get women. Nobody's out to specifically target women. That's what you'll hear a lot if you just listen to the pro-life side. Really, these bills are criminalizing conduct, not people. So if anybody, whether it's a male, a female, the abortionist, wants to avoid criminal penalties for murder, for murdering a baby, just don't murder a baby. That's as simple as it is.
One of, I think it was it the, no, it might have been the guy in charge of ethics at the Baptist, for the Southern Baptist Convention. Yeah, basically made the argument that women grow up in a culture of death, and so that there's just ignorance. But I find that to be a foolish argument in light of organizations like Shout Your Abortion, where we have 1,000 hours of YouTube videos of women happily shouting and celebrating the murder of their unborn child. I think at a certain point, we as Christians have to be willing to just state the obvious that we're just using abortion as any other form. It's just a murder condom. It's just essentially what we're using it as. We're trying to create more convenience and comfort for ourselves, and it's from the mothers' mouths that these are coming from. We don't have to. I don't think we have to shrink back from that. We would want any murderer who is so unremorseful that they are celebrating their murder to face the full weight of legal consequences for their actions. It seems almost, at this point, I think it is just almost ridiculous for us to think we need to protect the mothers who are choosing to do this. But abolitionist bills obviously take into account the full legal system. And so for those mothers that are coerced or forced or under threat to get the abortion, there would be obvious, provisions made in these laws for those, right?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I should have mentioned that as well. But yes, the existing legal system in due process and, presumption of innocence, all those different standards that apply to anybody else also apply in the case of an abortion. So we're not just going to throw mothers in prison on the mere suspicion that they had an abortion. They have to actually be, there has to be probable cause to investigate. They have to be indicted. They have to, stand before a jury of their peers and go through the whole legal process and be proven beyond a reasonable doubt to have done what they are accused of doing. And then finally, and there's still appeals processes. There's all sorts of different safeguards we have, so we're not condemning innocent people for crimes they didn't commit. And there's also leniency. Maybe there's mitigating circumstances. Maybe it was a woman who was abused and had a difficult health issue. All sorts of things. There's mitigating circumstances, just like in other homicide cases. So it's not just a one and done. Every single woman who ever has an abortion or is merely suspected of it just gets the chair. Nobody's saying anything like that. It's just, think of whatever happens if you murder a born person willfully, with malicious intent, and just that's what happens if you murder a preborn person as well.
And I think the basic reality that we all know is we all like, oh, I'm sorry, we're guys sitting here, right? So when guys get together and we're talking about something like, we're like, hey, you know what? There'd be a lot less pedophiles if we strung them up in town square.
Yeah,
and
short rope, tall tree. Yeah,
right, and we threw rocks at them, there'd probably be a lot less pedophiles, going out around molesting kids. And somehow we just are like, well, it's the mother. Well, it's not the mother. It's not the mother. It's the murderer. And at a certain point, we have to actually be able to
right. Speak frankly. Yeah.
Right. Speak clearly about what is actually what is actually happening.
Right. One of our bill sponsors down in Texas made a really interesting point a few months ago. So he said, if there's just a normal gang shooting, it might make, the Philadelphia Inquirer, right? We're here in South Jersey, southeastern PA, might make local news. Murders happen sometimes. It's really sad, but not too big of a deal in our eyes, at least. If a father murders his child, that might make state news. It might make the rounds a little bit more. But when a mother murders her child, it makes national news. We all hear about it, even if it happens across the country. And I think it's because we realize mothers are uniquely fit by God to nurture and love their children. And it's just so unnatural when that happens, when the mother is the one who turns on the child with malicious intent. Males are a little bit more aggressive. They're not as intimately connected emotionally to their children. They are, of course, but to a lesser extent. And so we recognize that's also wicked and evil. But when the mother does it, there's a certain level of just shocking, unnatural. It's just hard to fathom. But for some reason, we just it's the opposite when it comes to abortion. As long as it's before they're born, then the father might be a willful murderer, but the mother never is. We hear that all the time, and it makes no sense.
Yeah, it's definitely a double standard, and it's just a pretty disingenuous conversation when we start having it and you start actually peeling back the layers and thinking about what you're saying. I haven't done a lot of abortion rally mill ministry, but I have friends that have, and some of the most vitriolic statements that they have hurled at them are from the mothers who are seeking abortions for their children, that are proudly stating that they would do it again and again and again.
Right.
It's hard. It is hard because they're undoing the creative order, and that is the problem for us to try to wrap our mind around. Well, it's the mother. Well, mother's murder, and all man is sinful, and the depths of man's heart is who can know the depths of that sin. So.
Exactly. Yeah. I've been doing abortion mill ministry for 6 years here in Philadelphia, and I've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of women go through with this. And, sure, a lot of them just kind of whisk themselves in. They rush past us. They don't really want to engage in conversation or anything like that. But, yeah, there's a pretty decent share that will cuss at us, that will, tell crude sexual jokes to, get under our skin or try to. They'll manifest all manner of rebellion as they're going in to murder a baby. Just a couple weeks ago, a woman took her sister, and the woman came out and she was pretending to pray to Jesus, like, "Oh, Jesus, oh, forgive me," like just being completely facetious with it. I've met multiple women who, they're like, "Yeah, this is my 8th abortion. I know it's murder. I don't really care. I just want to get back to, having intercourse." We've seen anything you can imagine. We've also seen the victims too. We've seen, the woman who clearly does not want to be there, but is, experiencing heavy coercion. A couple of times we've called the police in those instances. So just treating all women as a monolithic victim is not at all what happens. And I think a lot of these pro-life leaders actually went to the abortion mills and interacted with the women they're talking about. They would maybe know that.
Yeah, instead of making sideways arguments that help protect them from making hard decisions about law, which is literally why they've been elected.
Right.
So,
yeah.
You're there to make hard decisions about legislation, and thus you're in the legislature.
It's in the name.
It's right there. It's
right.
legislation.
It's in the name. Yeah.
You guys do a really great job of connecting the legislation back to the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. And I know that maybe you haven't been involved all the way back then, but I think you were around long enough to. I was intrigued to see those early abolitionist laws coming in before Roe v. Wade was repealed, and the ardent conviction of those abolitionists that the 14th Amendment and the right to life that we all share made Roe v. Wade completely null and void, and they were encouraging their state to go against the Supreme Court. Was that something that you got to experience at all?
To an extent, yeah. So I became an abolitionist in 2021, so that was the year before Roe was overturned. I remember I reported on a few bills at the Daily Wire that did have ignore Roe language in them, saying, like this does not, you have to still follow this bill even if the federal court says you can't, things like that. There were attempts at that. I think what the overturn of Roe really did, because again, we have more abortions post-Dobbs than we did pre-Dobbs. What the overturn of Roe really did is make the pro-life movement show their hand, which is that they didn't actually want to end abortion. We were told for 50 plus years that as soon as we overturned Roe, it would be, abortion would be over in most of the country, or in much of the country. And then here, lo and behold, we have people pushing end abortion bills, abolition bills, and it's the pro-life movement that says, it's too soon, we still have more work to do. And it's like, I thought Roe was the one thing keeping this, intact, and now the excuses are shifting. Now it's more second victim, women are second victims. Now it's more, we have the midterms next year. We can't take too many political risks before the midterms. We might lose seats in Kentucky or one of these deep red states. It's absolutely absurd. And like you said earlier, Justin, it's gross. That's a good way to put it. It's gross. Yeah,
the idea that Kentucky would lose Republican seats is kind of, it's pretty asinine, actually.
Right.
Like, I get this going through the states, and just the stuff that happened in Kentucky was like, I'm like, come on, guys, it's Kentucky, for crying out loud.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah. Right. Yeah.
Like, it's Louisiana. Like, come on, guys. Like, what are we doing? Like,
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it is. It's very important for you to pre-order this book so that you will have this information, so that you can not like. I really like. I've like tried to steelman the pro-life argument, and even to a certain extent the smash mouth incrementalist argument over the past 4 years, just with my brother, just with other people. And there's when you start to understand how much the pro-life movement has fought against the actual abolishing of abortion, you realize that there's no argument. There's no way to have an honest dialogue with people who are making their bones on the existence of abortion, on the ever regulating of abortion instead of the ending of abortion, and it is just it is sad. With the Oklahoma state senator that just kept fighting it again and again. It's just so. Oh, it's you need to pre-order this book. You need to know these things. It's important.
Yeah, I think one of the things that highlights it's not just politicians. I mean, you did mention a little bit about, was it the ERLC or?
Yes.
Like it's in our, it's the complacency and the ickiness, the grossness is in our churches. It's in our religious institutions that we trust and that we buy books from, that we support by going to conferences. Like it's a bigger problem than I think I ever realized, prior to the last year or two. And I agree with Justin completely. Like the book is the perfect black pill for anybody to be like, oh my gosh, like this is this is a giant problem. I'm really intrigued to see what kind of waves this book makes. I mean, Founders is publishing it, so it's coming from a staunchly Christian, publishing house, and I'm really intrigued to see what kind of backlash, because I'm assuming you're expecting backlash to this, in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm really intrigued. And
he's already sharpening his swords. He's ready to go.
And I mean, and good on Founders and Tom Askell and that organization for having the stones to be willing to publish it too. Because they're in the thick of it as well in the Baptist circles, and Some names were named, and things were exposed, and things are happening. Yep. So I'm praying that the Lord really blesses that work. Justin, did you have any more book focused questions, or can I ask?
Yeah. One of the things. Sorry, you opened up the door.
No, that's fine. I wanted it open.
One of the things you put out in the book, pretty much at every state, as you go through state by state, the pro-life agenda, shooting down abolitionist bill after abolitionist bill. You also talk about a lot of the good that is happening on the ground with the abolitionist movement. So I'll ask you two questions. The first one's a specific one. I was really encouraged, and this is where I want listeners to know, like, abolition is not something it's not going away. It's not being defeated. It's growing in a very different way, in a much more, you keep saying grassroots, a much more grassroots way. So in the state of South Carolina, you guys, I keep saying you guys, the abolition movement saw in the voting an actual tremendous amount of support against incumbents by abolitionist candidates. Can you speak to that and how that's kind of why that would be an encouraging thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of these red states already have this dynamic of the establishment versus the more conservative grassroots, like you said. So in South Carolina, Rob Harris and Josiah Magnuson were two of the main proponents of the abolition bill. And those were the two lawmakers who the Republicans wanted out, the establishment Republicans wanted out the most. So they poured money into the opponents, they endorsed the opponents, everything, and the opponents got creamed in the election. They lost embarrassingly. So we're seeing that across the country. Dusty Devers is probably a really good example that a lot of people may have been following, where he ran against in a very crowded primary, and he won, and he beat the establishment candidate who had a ton of money pumped into her campaign. And he did it just by, being more determined. He knocked, I think, personally on 6,000 doors is what I heard from him. He had an entire church behind him that went and helped him with that. Didn't raise that much money. Still had some, but not even close to as much as his opponents, like by orders of magnitude. And yet he still won, and it shows that people actually want this, and they'll support you. And he wasn't quiet about being an abolitionist. He's been a very prominent abolitionist for even a long time, even when he was just a pastor, not a state lawmaker. And he ran his campaign. Like the first point of his ad was saying, "I am for the abolition of abortion," and so he's making it very clear that's what he's there to do, and the people love him for it. So it's very encouraging because people are waking up. It's slowly but surely it's waking up, like leaven working through the whole lump. People are waking up to this issue. So it's like you said, it's very slowly and then all at once. There's all these different grassroots movements across the country of Christians who are just working in their local and state levels trying to end abortion, and it's only going to grow from here, Lord willing.
Amen. And one of the other things you point out in the book is that at each one of these state levels, the focus of the abolitionist movement is not just on the legislation. It's not just on the legislative nature that you're trying to achieve and end with a law, but it's also focused on actually redeeming our churches. Right. Can you speak to why that is such a vital aspect to the movement itself?
Yeah, for sure. So I want to be really careful in how I speak about this, because I don't think pastors are supposed to be full-time political activists or anything like that. I think some people kind of conflate categories a little bit and say, my pastor needs to, basically spend half his time campaigning against abortion. Or no, I think, he should be handling word and sacrament. But I think, the pastors in this country should be very morally clear. They should be the main moral voice against child sacrifice and, every other issue we face, whether it's sodomy, whether it's transgenderism. So the churches need to awaken, and the pastors need to be models for their people and how to actually oppose some of the evils we face. So, and some of them they'll go and they'll run for office. So they'll go and lobby their lawmakers. They'll go to the state houses and try to pass bills. So it really needs to be a vibrant, bold Christianity that sees what time it is and actually, realizes that now is time for repentance. We've been compromising with evil for too long. We've been too afraid of man, and now it's the time to actually fear the Lord instead. So that's definitely a theme in the book, is a lot of pastors waking up to this and seeing why they should be models for their people and going and opposing abortion. And just everyday Christians rising up. Like the whole narrative in each chapter is based on one Christian in each state. that sort of gets converted, gets understands why the abortion issue matters, and then goes and they're enthusiastic about ending abortion, and they realize the pro-life movement is now opposing them, and they become abolitionists. So it's the same sort of pattern, and we're seeing it every single day across the country as people are changing their minds, and the points are irrefutable because they're biblical. So the word's getting out, and God's doing great things.
Yeah, and as a pastor, I think one of the key things, pastors aren't inherently political activists, but if you're a pastor that is going to be speaking the word speaks to what happens in public, and that is essentially what politics are. You don't get to not have opinions on what is happening in public policy in your state, in your county, in your country. You don't get to put your head in the sand. That is not to say that our primary role isn't to, shepherd the sheep that God has given in the flock. That is to say that when you speak on these things, you must speak clearly and you must teach clearly about these things so that your flock, which is actually also going out and living life into the world, is prepared to adequately address these things, and making that a key piece of what you guys are doing is definitely essential, because we've had a lot of shepherds that have fallen asleep at the pulpit, and so the sheep have become very complacent in that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and so I have a lot of good friends at Love Life. So it's a national ministry that they focus mostly on the abortion mills, so they have full-time abortion mill missionaries, basically. But one of the things they do is they try to engage the churches, and it's actually really sorrowful, disappointing to hear some of the things they hear from pastors where, they'll say, well, there's so many women in my church who have had abortions, so I can't speak about it. I might offend them. Or, that's a political issue. So on both those points, first of all, women need the gospel if they've had an abortion. That's, Christ forgives murderers. I know many, many women and men who've gone through with abortions who are now, full-time abolitionists or really involved abolitionists, realizing that God has redeemed them. They want to call others to repentance too. And on the point of politics, you said, Justin, as long as Satan can label something political, that means now it's off limits for the church or for pastors. So if we have this sort of pietistic division, artificial division between, politics and the sacred, not realizing that, no, of course, the Bible and the church should be a prophetic voice in the public square, that's going to be a clear avenue to be subverted by the devil.
Yeah, and third, that's just gay. Like, what an offense! What an offense to the gospel to say. Like, seriously, like we're Christians, right? Like, we know that we're broken. We know that we're sinful. We stand with Paul and say that we are the chief of sinners. Like how can you not preach against it? Like, what the heck?
And to the pastor that is not willing to speak because you've had women that have had abortions in your church is just foolish, as if the redemptive work of Jesus Christ can't heal hurt that is already there. It's already there. You not speaking on it doesn't change the fact that hurt, that sin is a stain that is already present, and you not speaking against it is actually not helping them to be able to be healed by the blood of Jesus Christ for that offense. And it's just stupid.
We experienced, Justin, do you remember, I mean, sorry, this is complete anecdote. Like, do you remember when Pops led kind of like that sexual assault Sunday at our old church? Yep. The amount of flack that he got for that.
Yep.
Like, and the amount of people, I think I was a teenager or a very early 20-year-old at the time when, like, I'll never forget, she must have been 70-year-old grandma come to me and say, my husband was abusive, but he's dead. How do I forgive him? Like, she's carrying that guilt in that church for decades. And no one is addressing the elephant in the room. And, like, just like, that woman was bottled up and hurting for years and years and years, and no one was helping her. And it's the same thing. Like, I can't imagine coercing my wife to abort a child, but the amount of weight of guilt and shame that woman or that man has to endure, and for a pastor to be silent on it is just, it's a complete bastardization of the gospel. It's a complete fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to be a Christian. So shame on them. And I pray for their repentance too. Goodness gracious.
Right. We're living in the worst fruit of the sexual revolution. So pretty much all of us are in some way impacted by that. So Like for the young men, it's pornography. Like I always tell older people, I don't know a single young man in my generation who has not had to fight that at some level. And when we just, don't talk about it, then you think you're abnormal. You think that, the guilt is just yours and you should be really ashamed of yourself, instead of realizing that, no, a lot of other people around me have battled it and then battled it successfully. Like I can see that in my own life as a huge testimony of God's grace. Like when I became a Christian in college, like I saw so much victory over sexual sin that I would never have thought possible when I was in high school, So we should be talking about these things. We should be, holding ourselves as examples like, look, repentance is possible. Sanctification is possible because I've lived it. And abortion is no exception. I know so many, like I said, older women in the faith who, have murdered 1, 2, 3 children, and now they're talking about it openly, and they're encouraging others that no, there's life after this. There's life in Christ alone. You can't really have any clearance from that guilt except for in Christ, but you can and should run to him, and he's truly means it when he says he's the savior of sinners. That like Matthew 1 says, he came to save his people from their sins.
Yeah, sin in the dark has power, and Proverbs is so clear about this. Sin in the dark has power, but when sin is brought to light, it loses all of its power. And the light of the gospel, it cleanses and purifies in a really true and deep, meaningful way.
That's exactly what I was looking up, Justin. I went right to Ephesians 5. Do not participate in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them.
Expose them. Yeah.
Because verse 13, but all things become visible when they are exposed by the light. Like light on sin removes the power of guilt and shame and the terrible weight of judgment that is placed upon you by a holy and loving God, rightfully so. Like exposing that, confronting that, confessing that, and repenting of that is the only thing that frees you from the burden.
Yep.
And that's why I love the thoroughly Christian approach in the abolitionist movement. Like non-Christians are not by definition abolitionists, as according to the Norman Statement and other things. Like abolition is a complete work of Christ. And when we do things his way, the Bible is fairly clear that he will honor, nations that uphold righteousness. And that's what the Christian abolitionist seeks.
Right.
I do have another interesting question. Justin, do you think we have time to talk about Rob's question?
Yeah, but I did want to ask one more question. I think we can do both of them. Last 2 questions.
Ben, sure. Are you good on time? Are you
yeah,
okay?
I'm totally good on time.
All right, perfect.
One of the things you point out, just because Jesse, that question you're about to ask definitely needs to be the last question.
Yeah.
Now we can let Ben sweat about whatever that question is. With the
right. Go back to the Middle East on this one.
Yeah. Totally back to the Middle East.
And your thoughts on Israel? No, you mentioned how the abolitionist movement tends to be younger, and you're seeing younger politicians engaging in this process. We've been talking about for months this idea that we are seeing a trending towards what we can at least say at minimum are more traditional views and traditional values from the younger generation. Is that something that you've been experiencing consistently in the abolitionist movement?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So I'm 25 years old. I can certainly say in my generation, I know so many, young men my age who have this thirst for tradition, for something that's grounded and rooted in reality, in history. They want to be connected to something. They don't want to be, just merely catered to on an emotional level. They want to know that their life has meaning. So it drives a lot of, you see the headlines all the time, drives young men toward Christianity, and especially the older, more traditional forms like, Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy. And I would say, you can find the same things in Reformed Protestantism, but that's another story. But
you can find
I definitely
things better.
Yeah, true biblical Christianity. Yeah,
amen. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I certainly see, like a lot of young men have lived and learned the hard way the fruit of the sexual revolution, and it's impacted our lives tremendously. Whether it's divorced parents, there's divorce rates. We're a few generations into just treating divorce as normal. Whether it's pornography, like I mentioned, whether it's having the own shame from your own sexual past, whatever the case may be. So it drives people toward really seeing, okay, this does not work. I've tried doing it my own way, and now I want to see what God has to say about this. And you believe his word for what it is, and then you just go from there. And I think, not to say there aren't older people who do that too, like Tom Askell, the head of Founders Ministries. He and his brother Bill are both older, and yet they in just the past few years have become abolitionists. And so it's not to say that older people can't repent or can't grow in Christ. Of course not. Christ. The whole premise of the show, we've talked about it a lot, is that Christ redeems and sanctifies his people and moves them in ways they couldn't expect. But yeah, God is doing something in my generation, in the younger generation, and I think time will tell what that is, but it's been encouraging.
Now, does he sanctify black people in the same way that he sanctified? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
What a fruitless discussion. What a waste of everyone's time. You know who we're talking about. You know who you are.
You know who you are. Oh, man.
All right, now the most dangerous question. The most dangerous question that I am so anxious to hear what Ben's going to say. Go for it, Jesse.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you were just yeeting that. All right, so
I was eating it right to you, baby.
Our friend Rob, he does start this way. He says, "I like Ben, so this isn't meant to be contentious."
Oh, and side note, Ben, where are you originally from?
Pittsburgh.
Outside
of Pittsburgh.
So you're definitely not a Birds fan then.
No, he's a Steelers fan. I already talked about this. Well,
yeah.
All fair.
That is so sad for you. Anyway, go ahead, Jess.
Go Birds. So he says, if we would physically intervene to protect our neighbor from a knife-wielding attacker, perhaps with a firearm or in some other way that physically restrain the attacker, shouldn't we, practically speaking, treat abortion prevention in the same way if abolition is to be principally consistent from legislation to action?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wrestle with that, and I think ultimately God is the one who gives the sword to the state. So we're still calling for that, but we're calling for it through lawful means. If you look at the tradition of Protestant resistance theory, look at the Peasants' Revolt during the early Reformation, it was very clear that it turns really bad when people start to just take the sword out for themselves, instead of realizing that when it comes to public evils like the abortionist who is protected under law, it's really the state that should be doing that. So that would be my answer to that question is, I think we should all use our lawful means, and for those who are in civil office, that means, yes, you can absolutely wield the sword against evildoers, and you actually have the duty before God to do that. So really all of abolitionism is just going to the state and saying, please wield the sword. You have to wield the sword. Look at what's happening because you're not wielding the sword. The wicked are walking around and murdering and doing whatever they want and without any consequence. And, we're all suffering for it. We're all being judged as a nation for it. So that's really what the call is for the abolitionists is, we recognize that there is a sword to wield, but it goes really poorly, and history proves this, when we just start picking it up ourselves. We go to the state and the avenues through which God has appointed to actually do that.
All right, but in keeping with abolitionism and the Underground Railroad, what if we dug a series of tunnels under abortion mills that weakened the infrastructure and caused their collapse? I'm just saying. That's just going back to the abolition movement original.
Did.
Sure. That's not really what. Yeah, they didn't literally have real underground railroads.
What if? What if
she dug her tunnels? What, underneath the platforms at the ports? Like, is that where she?
I'm just saying. What if we created an underground railroad? And, oops. Oopsie. all right. That's not right.
Oh,
yes, we would just like to. Yes, state, please stop wielding the sword against babies and start wielding it against murderers. That's what we're trying to. That's what we're going for here. Pretty simple.
That's what your state's doing. Yeah, that's what New Jersey is doing by inviting people in to have. They're wielding the sword against babies instead of people who murder babies. Yeah,
correct. Yeah. Correct. And just to clarify my earlier statement, when I said that if aliens came down, I wasn't speaking about illegal aliens. I was speaking about literally if Martians came down, New Jersey would be like, "Would you like to kill your child?
Yeah.
We can help you do it."
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But also
but
they are also paying for illegal aliens to have abortions too. So that
is a thing.
Pretty bad. That's really bad here. Bad.
Are there
save us, Ben?
Speaking of the great terrible state of New Jersey, so are there any deep blue states like New Jersey, but not New Jersey because I know New Jersey, that are attempting abolition bills, or is it just mainly in red states for now, and then hopefully the fire will spread?
Yeah, it's mostly red states. There have definitely been blue states that have proposed it. So Colorado had one a couple of years ago. I believe Washington or Oregon had one. It's definitely less common, but again, it forces the conversation. So, even in a blue state, you're not going to get a heartbeat bill passed. You're not going to get pretty much any, anti-abortion legislation passed. So why not be prophetic and call for it all and force the conversation and start to build some kind of a movement to actually abolish it among Christians. So, one of the great things about abolition bills is no matter whether it's a red state, a purple state, a blue state, it sends out this beacon saying, all Christians in the state who want to end abortion, this is who you flock to. This is who's trying to do it. You need to join them. So in Ohio last week when we proposed that bill, we had wall-to-wall media coverage, state, national, local, all levels. And it was really great to see. And you have hundreds of thousands of people, especially in Ohio, really considering the arguments that are being made, looking as Ohio Right to Life is desperately trying to explain why you shouldn't actually pass a bill to end abortion, even though their name is literally Ohio Right to Life, and they say that they're for personhood of babies. So these bills have this amazing effect of shifting the Overton window and, honoring, doing it in a godly way, in the same way that John the Baptist shifted the Overton window, or Elijah did, or Christ did in his ministry. We're doing the same thing by just standing on God's truth and letting him do what he will with it.
Do we need somewhere to have the organization's name changed to Right to Some Life? That would be more accurate to their organization, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah.
Right to Certain Lives.
Justin, I'm gonna make a sticker and I'm gonna send it to Dan in Ohio. Ohio Right to Some Lives.
Some lives. Ohio Right to Some Lives.
Yeah.
Abolish abortion now.
Some lives matter. Oh my gosh.
Well,
I have a question. I have no background to this question. I don't know.
I'm
what this
so
means.
sorry that earlier, Ben, you said you had no time constraints. I do apologize.
I think this is just a soft question. Although, again, I have literally no context for this. But I'm going to read it how I read it in my mind, which is kind of like a whimsical, curious voice.
I don't know what's happening now, Ben.
You don't, and I don't either. But I'm going to go for it. This question asker says, "Tell me, friend, when did Zeisloft the Wise abandon reason for madness?"
Long time ago.
That was Sam
Okay.
Riley asking that. I have no background to that question, but
That's a good one. I like that.
I went with it.
I like the Lord of the Rings reference. That's good.
Is that what that's from? Okay, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I remember that now. Yeah.
Ben, we're here. We're at the end of this thing. We need to know, how can we pre-order this book so that as soon as it is out of our hands?
Yes. So you can go to press.founders.org and you'll find the book pretty quickly. It's just, again, it's called Forsakers of the Fatherless. And you can actually use the code FIDE, F-I-D-E, so the last word in your podcast title, for 10% off. So that's pre-order is already started, so you can go do that now. I believe the book is still scheduled to ship in August. I know it's getting printed right now. So yeah, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to discuss it and just other broader issues and shooting the breeze a little bit, and it's been good.
Well, we hope that this is just, helpful to you to prepare you for the big time interviews that you're going to be doing now. You start here and it's, it just eases you in to the big interviews coming your way.
I don't think he started here. I think he stooped here.
Just go. They stooped.
This is a
Thank you for
desperation
condescending
interview.
to us.
No, we've been meaning to do this for a few years now, right? Because we're pretty much
It's
in the
so
same
true.
area, and we've met each other a few times in person, and yeah. So I'm glad we finally got to do it. Yeah.
Where was the first time? Did we meet in DC?
G3
the first
DC,
time?
maybe.
Yeah, I think a couple, definitely in Atlanta for G3 2 years ago.
Atlanta. Yep.
And I think there was also a G3 before that too, like in the fall of 2022. I think we saw each other there too. Is
Yeah.
that
Yep.
does that sound right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it was the DC one, the local, whatever they were trying to do then.
Regional.
Regional.
Regional, yeah. Yep.
But yeah, no, this is a long time coming. And so head over to Founders and you keep searching until you find the book. You don't stop until you find it. And then when you're going to check out, you just type in FIDE for 10% off, and you can't beat that. Because faith is important. Essential.
Right.
That's awesome. Jess, you good? You got anything else?
Yeah, I was just going to press.founders.org. You don't actually have to search very far. It's like right there.
Okay.
Like if you can't see it, like you have physical problems that need to be addressed in an urgent.
It's a bright red cover, yeah.
You can't miss it, guys.
I'm not
You
a
can't
doctor,
miss it.
but I am a nurse, and I know that if you cannot see it, it's a problem.
I was about to make a comment, and I didn't make it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for helping me to grow spiritually. Ben, this was absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us tonight. And I do hope, Christian, that you will get to it, get the book, and read it, because you will look. If you like conspiracy theories, this book is made for you. And it's a conspiracy theory that is trying to crush Jesus. So I say, get at it.
It's not even a theory. It's just real life. And
They literally come out and say it. Yeah, it's not even it's a conspiracy
real life.
fact.
You have to sell it as a conspiracy theory. This is called marketing, everybody. We're marketing the book.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, jeez. Well, at the end of every one of our episodes, you know, dear listener, that we like to encourage you this day to seize the faith.
Yay.
Good job, Ben.